In the UK, they had their own auto-enrolment scheme, which basically was to take those who had no occupational pension scheme and bring them into the net. And that was set up, first of all, the kind of John the Baptist precursor, in our case, to the CPA, was the personal accounts delivery agency called PADA. And then Nest was set up in 2012. So they've had a decade of experience of actually administering and processing the deductions, making the investments, and bringing a whole pool of, I think it's now 11.5 members, into the pension net. And Zoe has come from London to join us to actually say, well, if we were doing it all again, what would we do differently? These are the mistakes we made, and so on. First of all, maybe give us an outline of the way Nest has operated over the last 10 years before we take a dive into what the starting point should be, entry age, income,
Sure.
self-employed and so on. Just give us an overview of the way Nest has operated.
Sure. So we've got 11.5 million members, I should say, rather than 11.5 members.
Oh, sorry.
I wish it was. I wish it was.
Absolutely.
We serve 1 million employers. So it's really interesting listening to you all talking about the beginning of the Master Trust journey in Ireland, because in England, you know, in the UK, we have real scale, right? 1 million employers is no kind of easy task in terms of a population to serve, and most of those are small to medium employers. So we are the only scheme in England that's in the UK rather that's free to use at the point of use, which means we just by default essentially get a vast proportion of the small to medium employers in the country. We were, as Ivan said, set up as the Personal Accounts Delivery Authority by government in 2007. Automatic enrolment went live in 2012. We didn't spend the whole 5 years setting up the scheme. The first year and a half or so was spent sorting out the funding strategy for Nest. So we had to negotiate a loan from government to fund the scheme. And the procurement of the administration service took about a year and a half, couple of years. Then we went live kind of mid-2011 in a very, very small way, with a kind of member of Nest putting £12 or so into the scheme. And then the staging and phasing of employers started in earnest in 2012. We've scaled incredibly fast. We're continuing to grow at an enormous rate. We've got 26 billion in assets, which isn't that enormous when you look at other pension schemes, but our footprint is huge, and that means those assets will grow extremely fast over the coming years. The market in the UK is consolidating around the Master Trust structure. So we had about 85 Master Trusts a few years ago. We're now down to about 36. Still getting smaller. I really think that's the future, right? It needs to get smaller. We probably should end up with sort of 10 or 12 in my view, because through having that real scale, you can deliver, you know, real value for members, and that's what it's all about. So we're priced pretty low. We charge 30 basis points annual management charge, an additional 1.8% contribution charge. Eventually, we'd like to drop that contribution charge and just charge 30 basis points. We can, you know, deliver real scale through our investments, and we have a lot of clout on the ESG side just because of our scale and our potential in the market. And it just provides the best vehicle, I think, for those members, many of whom don't know they're saving in a pension. So probably about a third of our members don't even know they've got a pension. When you ask them about investments, they say, well, you're investing my money? That sounds really risky. What's an investment? You know, so the level of understanding is extremely low. But through scale and through really good governance, we can provide, you know, among the best in the market, value and deliver really, really good returns on behalf of those members who are largely inert.
So the cost of Nest, the administration, I think we propose to have a cap on the Central Processing Authority of 0.5%.
Right.
What do you have a cap on it? And it's funded. There's a deduction. So your basic model is 8%, which is 3% paid by the employer.
Yeah.
The employee.
4%
by the
3% from the employer, minimum of.
Yeah.
8% total. The employer can choose do the whole 8%, but none of them do. They do 3%. The employee does 4%, and then there's tax relief 1%. So total 8%. The cost of the scheme, the admin. So we've got a charge cap of 75 basis points. You can't charge more than that. We charge 30 basis points, but we also uniquely charge a 1.8% contribution charge. And the reason we do that is because we've got a whopping great loan from government we need to repay. So we need to bring forward some of the charge revenue in order to repay that loan. But if you look across the market, the average charge for a master trust in the UK is now about 48 basis points all in. So we're pretty much around the average.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the issues. First of all, who's in the net and who's not? At what point does a youngster earn? Is it based on age, their first job, or what?
Yeah, so the earnings trigger is £10,000, which I think is lower than what you're proposing in Ireland. So as soon as you're earning 10,000, you're in, so long as you're over 21, so that's the lowest age. And you don't contribute on the basis of all of your earnings. You contribute on the basis of earnings over a lower earnings limit, which is about £6,500. So if you think about it, for people who are earning pretty low amounts, so let's say I'm earning £12,000, £15,000, I'm only contributing, £7,000 of my earnings. So it is still tiny amounts. And one of the big challenges in the UK is, how do we actually deliver adequacy? Because we're nowhere near at 8%, and we've been talking about it for a long time. The economic circumstances make it extremely challenging to push contribution rates up, but there is a very live debate in the UK about how and when we should do that, and probably also get rid of that lower earnings limit.
So let's talk about who might be left out, because this is an attempt to bring all workers into it. Right. So people in the gig economy, people who are in part-time work and have more than one employment. Yeah. What way are self-employed and part-time workers dealt with?
Yeah, so not well is the answer. It's a big gap. So it was foreseen that the self-employed was a big gap when automatic enrolment was set up. We all knew it was going to be a problem. It's still a problem, and no one solved it. I think there's two angles to the kind of gig economy question, because gig economy workers have a very similar profile to a lot of the people who are in Nest, right? Who are changing jobs frequently, tend to be younger, tend to be lower earning. It's a real pity that those people aren't included in pension saving. I think personally the way to get them in is systematically through payment systems. So if you work for Deliveroo, or you work for, a courier company, you tend to be paid often via an app. Is other ways of using those app systems to kind of siphon a little bit of money off into a pension, or into even a sidecar liquid savings account that then flows into a pension. I think that might be the answer. And Nest Insight, which is is a kind of in-house think tank for Nest, is doing some work with the government looking at those kinds of mechanisms to try and get self-employed people saving, but it is a difficult nut to crack. The other thing I'd say about self-employed people is they're enormously diverse, from kind of, really quite wealthy people running businesses who might have very lumpy earnings to the gig economy worker, and they need different treatment. The other people who are excluded are multiple job holders, and that's a real worry, partly because a lot of those are women. So if I'm in the UK and I'm earning, let's say, £5,000 in 3 jobs, I'm not contributing anything to a pension because I haven't met the £10,000 earnings trigger. So that's a big problem, and that's something that DWP need to work with HMRC, the tax department, on to solve. And I do think they'll crack it eventually, but they haven't cracked it yet, and it's a big gap.
Right. The other gap perhaps could relate to parents, gender, women, maternity, gaps in their contribution record. Is there any facility or opportunity to make up that?
So I think the key 2 things I would do to try and address the gender pensions gap from an automatic enrolment perspective are, one, to the point I just made about multiple job holders, because that weights really heavily towards women, and also ethnic minorities actually tend to be more likely to hold multiple jobs. So solving that problem is critical. The other thing that's critical is bringing the age of enrolment down from 21 to 18, because those first 3 years of saving are really, really critical if you're going to go on to have a break and work record, as many women do. So if you're starting saving at 18, not only are they critical, they're also really, really important in terms of investment, because that's the money that's going to sit there the longest. So bringing that age down, I think, is really important too.
Post-retirement benefits. Now, the fact that you're only 10 years in operation means that this side of the story may change. I assumed, like public sector DB schemes, that you'd end up with some sort of superannuated pension. A lot of people with their post-retirement, so first of all, at what age can you collect? What age are you deemed to be retired? And surely if at 55 or in your 50s, you just get all your money refunded to you, it's just been a sort of temporary saving scheme, it defeats the whole point of providing for later life dependency needs. What is the story about post-retirement benefits?
So it's a huge risk, I would say, to the policy intent of automatic enrolment. The fact that you can, at the moment, you can take all your money out of 55 and do whatever you like with it. And when those reforms were brought in 2015, there was a lot of concern that people would simply, there was a kind of famous phrase from the pensions minister, people are just going to buy a Lamborghini, and we always refer back to that.
In current terms, they might be paying their electricity bill.
Well, right, okay, and the average savings pot in NEST is only about £2,000 at the moment, right? We're talking about small amounts of money. We think that, and research has shown that when you talk people through the retirements they might have simply on the state pension, and then you look at the savings they've got, even at £10,000, when they really think about it, they say, I want to turn that into an income because I could have a car, or I could, afford a dog. It's that kind of level of sort of life, sort of difference in quality of life, and it is significant at that level of income. So what we're trying to do is create income solutions for people in retirement where they can have the flexibilities come out of them if they change their mind, but fundamentally we tell them what a sustainable income looks like, and they can draw down their savings in kind of a sustainable way. Within that, we're looking at later life protection. So should there be some elements of mortality pooling at the back end so that it feels a bit more risk sharing, a bit more like a kind of collective defined contribution scheme? I think that's probably the future because it de-risks people and it delivers better returns. So there's a lot of sophisticated sort of design and thinking going on about that retirement phase. The one thing I'd say about it is we're probably not moving fast enough as an industry to do it. So we've got thousands of people already flowing into retirement. Most of them are cashing out. That's kind of fair enough to the extent that the pots really are tiny at the moment, but that doesn't sustain for long, and it does take a long time to build these products and processes. So I do think it's something that, as you introduce automatic enrolment in Ireland, it's worth thinking about from, as early as you possibly can, getting that post-retirement design right and making sure that to the extent possible, it feels like an income. Because when people say, I've got a pension, they expect it just to pay out. They think that automatically they'll hit an age and it'll start paying out just like the state pension. And clearly that's not how it works as it stands.
Okay, some questions from the audience. Please do get them in because we've only about 6-7 minutes left. I'll just go through them. Have costs to run auto-enrolment in the UK, how have costs run up to 1.2 billion sterling in those 10 years? Is the loan likely to be repaid by 2038 or at all? So we discussed the 3 basis points, the 0.4%, whatever. What do you say about that? Have costs grown to 1.7?
That's a question about NEST loan. So
okay.
NEST, it's correct that we are supposed to be repaying the loan by 2038. We are due to break even on the loan in the next kind of year or so, which is a really significant point for us because it means we won't be taking money from government anymore, we'll just be paying it back. And yes, we are still on track to pay back by 2038. But as you can imagine, it was a massive capital outlay to get a scheme running that could deal with that scale. So we're on track, but appreciate it's a lot of money. Yeah.
Okay, your fund management. My understanding here is that the CPA are going to outsource it, and they're going to have 4 levels of high down to low risk, and people can decide that. In terms of your fund management, the question is: does NEST use active or passive fund management in equity or bond portfolio, ignoring other asset classes? If both, what's the percentage split?
I don't know. I'm sorry. But whoever asked that question, if you come and find me at the coffee break, I can tell you someone who does. But we're not passive investment managers, we're active managers. We have a team in-house. We manage some cash in-house, but most of the rest of it is managed through fund managers. But I can tell you the equity bond split after a conversation with a colleague.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a cap in the UK on employer pensionable salary that employer contribution is based on? Surely where there's a big occupational pension scheme already in place, AE doesn't apply.
Yeah, so long as the duty in the automatic enrolment regulations is to contribute at least 3% of earnings. If there's a high quality scheme through which you already do that, you're exempt. Yeah.
Right. Why do employers, you won't like this question, why do employers in the UK choose solutions other than Nest?
Good question. No. There is a really lively marketplace, and it's really interesting to watch it, to see how it's developed. Because
how many choices do they have?
Well, there's about 36 master trusts. I think it is 36 master trusts in the market now. And they're all in the AE market? And they're all in the AE market. You don't have to have a master trust, right? You can have a single employer trust. There's different structures that you can choose. But by and large, employers choose these days a master trust to fulfil their automatic enrolment duties. There are some big schemes, so there's schemes like the People's Partnership and Now Pensions and Smart Pensions that play in a very similar space to us and have, frankly, pretty similar propositions and do attract, scale. So People's Partnership in particular is a not-for-profit scheme. They're doing very well. They've got. I think they've probably got about. I don't know how many members. They've got about 5 million, let's say. So the charges that they're asking employers to pay are very, very low. We're not talking a lot of money. They're simply outselling in the market and managing to gain some market share. But we do, of course, because we're free, we do get the vast bulk of employers who are kind of focused mainly on compliance. On
post-retirement model, does it include advice to people?
No, it definitely doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because it's too expensive. And actually, what we're really trying to do is to design a system that doesn't require anyone to take advice, that is really, really easy to use and just feels like an annuity.
How big is your team in Nest?
There's about 250 of us in the corporate centre, which includes the investment team, which is growing all the time, because I suspect over time we may well think about bringing some more things in-house. It includes the team overseeing the admin and all risk and compliance and central services and a little bit of strategy policy, which is my bit. Yeah.
I don't know, this question of why are pots so small after a decade? 26 billion, is that small?
So, yeah, I mean, the pots are small, right? So I said I think they're about £2,000 on average. Obviously, there's an enormous range within that. The reason they're so small is people move jobs so frequently. So one of the massive problems we've got in the UK is with small pots. So a lot of people, especially if they're working in industries like recruitment or the hospitality industry, let's say, might do 5 or 6 jobs over the course of their 20s, and they might all be with different pension schemes. And so there's a lot of dormant. Many of our 11.5 million members are dormant, more than half. And that's why the pots are so small. And also it's small. People are saving small amounts, right? They're just not saving anywhere near the amount they need to save, arguably, to reach an adequate retirement.
It's proposed to be 23. You're saying it should go lower than that lower figure you have in the UK?
I'm saying, the age? Yeah, I'm saying it should be 18, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So 23 is too high. Yeah. Final question,
yeah.
Which is my own question. After a decade of experience, and I think your insights are really useful, you don't avoid the question and so on. We're starting on this road a decade behind you and more. Would you do anything differently?
I think what I would do is think really seriously about what I want the scheme and the policy framework to look like in steady state. And I would design that in and put it in legislation from the start. So be brave, I guess, is what I'm saying, because the problem we have now is we've got contributions at 8%. We've got this lower earnings limit that means that the first 6,500 of earnings don't count. We've got the earnings trigger. Got the 21 age limit. It's not enough. We just know it isn't enough. we're going to have a whole generation of people retiring who I think will be really disenchanted when they get to retirement and they're like, well, I did what the government told me and it's nowhere near what I expected. And the problem is, now we're in a cost of living crisis, it's politically really, really difficult for anyone to change that and to sort of change the parameters. But I think if we start from the start, said, okay, over, I don't know, let's say 2020 to 25, we'll phase out the lower earnings limit and we'll bring down and it was all kind of pre-planned and pre-loaded, we'd probably be at 12% contributions by now, and we'd probably be going up further. And I think it's just a lot easier politically to push those decisions back, but make them in legislation early, so that you end up in, let's say, 15 to 20 years, and that's a really long time, but I know that's how long it takes, with a system that really genuinely is going to deliver adequate retirement incomes for DC savers.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can see how candid Zoe Alexander, she's gone to a lot of trouble to be here today.